Hello, true crime and wine time friends. Thank you for joining me, your host, Terry Dussault, as I dive into the case of the woman known as the Texas Black Widow. I would like to say thank you to Clayton from LaGrange, Texas, for suggesting this case. And as a person who does not like spiders, I can say I really do not like black widows of any form after this case. For today's episode, I am enjoying a Kim Crawford Sauvignon Blanc, which has a yellow and green hue, aromas of citrus and tropical fruits backed by characteristic herbanescence notes for which Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is renowned. An exuberant wine brimming with juicy acidity and fruit sweetness, providing a balanced flavor profile. The finish is fresh, zesty, and lingering. So I'm going to give this bottle an open. Luckily for me, it's one of those nice little screw tops, much easier for me to open. There we go, and give a nice pour here. Ah, perfect. Nice. Ooh, very zesty. Hello, True Crime and Wine Time friends. If you are addicted to True Crime and Wine Time and want to help us keep the wine flowing and show your support of the show, you can join our Patreon family at patreon.com/truecrimeandwinetime. We have several different tiers and something for everyone. By joining our Patreon family, you will get all episodes a day early, and each tier has additional content like extra episodes, Q&A with me, your host, blooper reels, and much more. So, go support us today at patreon.com/truecrimeandwinetime. This episode contains graphic content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Betty Lou Dunavant was born in March 1937 in Roxborough, North Carolina, to James and Margaret Dunavant. At the age of 3, Betty Lou lost her hearing due to complications with the measles. Betty Lou, along with her younger sister, brother, and parents, moved to Hampton, Virginia, where, when Betty Lou was 12, her mother was committed to a mental hospital, leaving Betty Lou to take care of her younger siblings instead of attending school. Later, Betty Lou would claim that she was sexually abused by her father and others during her childhood. Betty Lou married Robert Franklin Branson, husband number 1, at the age of 15 and gave birth to their daughter, Faye Branson, at age 16. Betty Lou said, after being convicted of murder, that her marriage to Franklin was an abusive and hostile marriage. Betty Lou attempted suicide in 1953 after the birth of her first child and separated from Franklin for 6 months. However, Betty Lou and Franklin reconciled and had 5 more children: Connie, Shirley, Phyllis, Robert Branson II, known as Robbie, and Bobby, the youngest. Friends and family say that neither Betty Lou or Robert Franklin were faithful during their marriage, and that Betty Lou liked to go out dancing and drinking while her children stayed home and Robert worked. Robert left Betty Lou in 1969 for another woman and divorced Betty Lou, after which she claims left her financially and emotionally devastated. Some say this is when Betty Lou began drinking heavily and starts down a dark path. Faye, the oldest child, followed in her mother's steps and left home at the age of 15 to get married. Betty Lou had the other 5 children at home, and it was overwhelming. Betty Lou sent one of her daughters and Robert to live with their father, while sending another one of her daughters to live with her eldest daughter, Faye. And she sent Shirley to live with friends. she only kept Bobby, the youngest, at home with her. She told everyone this was to be temporary, but she didn't see the kids except Bobby for another 5 years. Betty Lou hated being alone and says she drank to try and forget her loneliness. She was on welfare, and it was not enough to support her and the kids. She says that Franklin did very little to help support the children after the divorce. Betty Lou, who hated being lonely, then married Billy York Lane, husband number 2, in 1970. The marriage was a constant roller coaster as the two fought often, and at times, Billy hit Betty Lou, leaving her bruised and battered. The two would break up, get back together, break up, and get back together repeatedly, with Betty Lou getting pleasure out of flaunting herself with other men during their breakups, until the marriage ended with Betty Lou shooting Billy twice. Betty Lou says she and Billy were separated, and Billy came over and forced his way into her house, and I quote, she said, "That's when I reached behind my back and got my gun. He didn't act afraid. Maybe he thought I was bluffing. He took another step toward me, so I fired at him. Can't remember how many times, but I kept firing until I saw him stagger out the back door." In 1972, at the age of 35, Betty Lou was charged with attempted murder after police talked to Billy, who said that Betty Lou called him and asked him to come over, which he did. He said the two began arguing as normal, and that as he was leaving, he was shot by Betty Lou. Billy's story rang true with police since the shots Betty Lou fired were into Billy's back. Billy survived the shooting, but had permanent nerve damage which affected his ability to walk normally. Billy and Betty Lou divorced, but would later remarry after the charges were lowered to a misdemeanor. Reports say that Betty Lou was the perfect, loving wife while Billy was in the hospital after the shooting, and that their reconciliation only lasted 1 month, with the two divorcing again. Okay, friends, I need a drink before we move into Betty Lou's next marriage. In case you're like me and hate math, this makes 2 husbands, but 3 marriages for Betty Lou. This wine is zesty. I like it. Betty Lou took Bobby, the only child she had kept at home, and moved to Little Rock, Arkansas to start over. In 1973, Betty Lou then met Ronnie Threkold, and the two later married on February 16, 1978. Husband number 3, for those of you that are counting. As with her other marriages, the marriage to Ronnie was filled with violence from both sides against each other. After one incident of Ronnie hitting Betty Lou, she took revenge by slashing the tires on his truck. It was said that Betty Lou was a jealous woman and accused Ronnie of cheating on her with every other woman, and even accused him of sleeping with her daughters. Ronnie had decided enough was enough and began packing up to leave Betty Lou, and was out putting his personal belongings in his car when he heard a loud engine noise coming his way. Ronnie barely got out of the way as Betty Lou tried to run him over, but luckily only sprayed him with loose gravel due to his quick action of ducking between cars. Ronnie divorced Betty Lou in early 1979 after the car incident. Betty Lou began working as a topless dancer and was charged with public lewdness and spent 30 days in jail. This will make Betty Lou's second run-in with the law, as the first one I told you about earlier, of when she shot her husband Billy. Once again, for those of you who are not fans of math, this makes 3 husbands, 4 marriages, and 2 misdemeanors for Betty Lou's record. Betty Lou, who hated to be alone, would then go on to marry Dole Wayne Baker, who is known as Wayne, on October 3rd, 1979, husband number 4. Betty Lou, staying true to her history, wound up separating from and divorcing Wayne roughly 7 weeks later. Wayne was said to be a hard worker, but he was also a hard drinker, which led to many volatile arguments. In January of 1980, Betty Lou was seriously injured in a car accident, and while recovering, Wayne began wooing Betty Lou and begged for another chance at their relationship. Wayne was successful, and he and Betty Lou remarried. The couple decided they needed a new start and moved to Gun Barrel City, where Betty Lou bought a half-acre lot and Wayne purchased a trailer for the lot, which was situated right on the lake. And the couple was happy for a time. But as we are learning, Betty Lou didn't stay happy very long. Okay, wine time, friends. I don't know about you, but I need another drink. Ooh, I really like this one. So I have to tell you, while doing research, I went down the rabbit hole of trying to find out what you call someone who keeps getting married over and over. Here's what I found. In South Africa, a woman who keeps getting married is called a kloosterslet. And there's not a real translation in English, but the closest translation would be chapel slut. So, I guess since there's not a thing for serial marriage seeker, or I guess we will say Betty Lou is a chapel slut, or maybe I can make up the term serial wifey? Maybe? Anybody? Okay, well, another quick drink, and back to our case of the chapel slut, klooster slut, serial wifey, or otherwise known as the Black Widow. In October that same year, Betty Lou told several of her children that Wayne was abusive to her. Her children, like most children, took up for their mother and told her, get a divorce. The children agreed, as they had a hard time imagining Wayne hitting their mother because he had always been kind to them, and they had never seen him be anything but good to their mother. And they also knew how their mother could be. Betty Lou told her children she would take care of it in her own way. Shirley, Betty Lou's third child, asked her mother what she was going to do. And Shirley says her mother looked at her and told her she was going to kill Wayne. Shirley at first thought her mother was joking, but soon realized her mother was serious. Shirley begged her mother to get another divorce and to not do anything stupid. Betty Lou told her daughter that Wayne owned the trailer and that she wasn't going to have to start over again. Betty Lou had apparently been planning this for some time, as she showed Shirley a hole that had been dug in the backyard for a supposed barbecue pit, but was actually going to be where she planned to bury Wayne and then build a patio deck on top of his grave. Holy macaroni, guys. This lady is literally telling her daughter her insane plan to kill her husband. I mean, seriously, Betty Lou, if you're going to kill your husband, leave your kids out of it. Okay, anyway, that night, Betty Lou sent her son Bobby to stay at a nearby friend's house. And the next morning, Betty Lou called her daughter Shirley to tell her she had killed Wayne and that she needed her help that night to bury Wayne in the prepared hole. Reports say that Betty Lou then called Wayne's boss and told him that she and Wayne had another huge fight and that Wayne stormed out and hadn't returned home yet. Wayne's boss was shocked because Wayne was a responsible employee and never blew off work, especially on big projects, and they had a big project. After several days of Wayne missing work, his boss went to the home of Betty Lou and Wayne, where he saw Wayne's new truck, but no Wayne. Wayne never returned to work and was never seen from again. Wayne's boss didn't believe that Wayne would take off without his truck and not tell him, but he didn't have any proof that Wayne hadn't just taken off. Now, I'm going to say he was married to Betty Lou. Maybe he ran off, wanted to. Betty Lou, once again, gets divorced from the missing Wayne, and lo and behold, just 2 short years later, she gets remarried. Now, I am starting to think Chapel Slut or Serial Wifey might just be Betty Lou after all. Betty Lou this time married Jimmy Don Beats, husband number 5, a man that was financially well off, unlike her previous husbands. Jimmy Don was a retired Dallas fireman and owned his own home, which was paid off, as well as a nice boat that he kept on Cedar Creek Lake. The couple met at a club where Betty Lou was working as a waitress, and friends say Jimmy Don was smitten with Betty Lou. She was nice, curvy, blonde, just his type. Jimmy Don moved in with Betty Lou as her property was right on the lake, where his home was not lakefront property. Upon moving in with Betty Lou, Jimmy Don rented out his home to his son Jamie. Betty Lou and Jamie did not like each other from the moment they met. One day soon, the home that Jamie was renting from Jimmy Don mysteriously burned down. Some say the house might have been salvageable, but someone or somehow the water at the house had been turned off. Thankfully for Jimmy Don and Jamie, Jimmy Don had insurance on the home and he was able to rebuild. Not too long after Jimmy Don's home burned down, his niece discovered a new life insurance policy in Jimmy Don's name, which she found to be interesting since Jimmy Don already had a healthy life insurance policy through the city of Dallas. The niece also found it interesting that the life insurance policy information went to Betty Lou's daughter's home and not her home she shared with Jimmy Don. She then told her Uncle Jimmy Don about the new policy, and he told her to cancel it immediately. And he confronted Betty Lou, who swore to Jimmy Don that it must be a misunderstanding. Now, I'm going to assume that the niece worked for an insurance company. I couldn't find any information about that, but I'm not sure how else she would find that information and then be able to cancel it. Jimmy Don went on to help improve Betty Lou's property, with Jimmy Don telling Robbie, whatever Betty wants, Betty gets. And Betty Lou wanted a wishing well planner, which she got. Jimmy Don and Robbie spent several days in the hot Texas summer building this wishing well. Little did Jimmy Don know that the true plan for the wishing well, well, anyone want to take a guess? Once again, Betty Lou told her daughter Shirley her plan to kill her husband, Jimmy Don. Shirley was outraged and said, "You promised me you would never kill anyone again." Okay, friends, I have to stop right here and take a drink. Once again, I cannot believe this mother is again getting her children involved with murder. What the hell? And second, why in the hell did Shirley not call the police after Betty Lou killed her previous husband? Get a divorce, people. Murder is not the answer. I have said this so many times. One more quick sip before we get back to Bunny Boiler Betty Lou. Betty Lou went on to tell her son Robbie that she planned to kill Jimmy Don. Robbie was upset because Jimmy Don was his favorite of all of his mother's husbands and the nicest, too. Betty Lou felt she was entitled to Jimmy Don's property, life insurance, and frankly, she was tired of sharing. Betty Lou had her son Robbie take Bobby out for a bit, while she, Betty Lou, went into the bedroom where her husband, Jimmy Don, was sleeping and shot him twice. Once in the chest and once in the head. Betty Lou called her daughter Shirley and told her she had killed Jimmy Don and needed help. Betty Lou wrapped Jimmy Don up in the bedspread and then used the matching sleeping bag to which she had buried Wayne in after killing him. Shirley refused to help her mother, and therefore Betty Lou had to wait for her son Robbie to get home to help her take Jimmy Don's body and dump it into the wishing well. Shirley had recently gotten married, and her new husband and her went over to Betty Lou and Jimmy Don's the next morning, where Shirley went into the house to talk to her mom while her husband stayed outside. Shirley came out, told her husband that her mom and Jimmy Don had gotten into a huge fight and that Jimmy Don went to Dallas to cool off. Shirley's husband was a little suspicious because here he was being told Jimmy Don went to Dallas, but his truck was sitting right there. He decided to keep peace with his new wife and didn't ask any questions nor voice his thoughts. Betty Lou went about her day, planting flowers in her new wishing well planter, and then, along with her son Robbie, she staged Jimmy Don's death. Betty Lou and Robbie took Jimmy Don's fishing supplies, along with Jimmy Don's heart pills, and put them in the boat and pushed it out into the lake. Betty Lou reported Jimmy Don missing to the Henderson County Sheriff, telling them that her husband had gone fishing and that he had not returned home and that he had been having trouble with his boat. Jimmy Don's boat was found roughly 6 days later, and police spent several weeks dragging the lake looking for Jimmy Don's body, which, of course, came up empty. Betty Lou tried to file Jimmy Don's life insurance, but was told she had to wait 7 years for him to be declared as dead since he was missing and no corpse had been found. Needless to say, Bunny Boiler Betty Lou was not happy and wanted the money then and there. Betty Lou began plotting ways to get some of Jimmy Don's money before the 7 years. First, by forging Jimmy Don's name on the boat title and selling it. Then, Betty Lou moved Jamie's belongings out of that house that was rebuilt after that suspicious fire and that he was still renting from his dad, and tried to sell the home without Jamie's knowledge. Jamie at this point sought legal help and got a restraining order against Betty Lou that prevented her from selling any of Jimmy Don's properties or belongings. One afternoon, not far after the restraining order, Betty Lou was seen outside by the AC unit of the home that Jimmy was renting from his dad. And a little bit later that day, the house burned to the ground for the second time. Betty Lou's children were unable to keep her secrets. They told their spouses, another sibling, all about their mother's murders. Now, Betty Lou, still unable to stand being alone, but unable to get married, hooked up yet again with another man, this time with Ray Bone, who had done time for murder. Everyone said he was downright mean and evil. Betty Lou's children did not like him and were afraid of him. Ray heard the rumors about the dead husbands. He went to see Robbie's wife, and somehow, after that, the rumors were not spoken of again, or at least not to Ray. Betty Lou was becoming frustrated because the insurance company would not pay out on the house since there were allegations it was arson. She had had enough. She then decided to meet with her attorney to figure out how to get the home insurance to pay and how to get the life insurance and widow's pension without waiting 7 years. Her attorney, E. Ray Andrews, who goes by E. Ray, advised Betty Lou to seek a determination of death. Betty Lou filed for the death certificate and swore to the judge that there were no other heirs to Jimmy Don's estate. The judge declared Jimmy Don Beats dead in March of 1985 and granted Betty Lou's request to be the named admin of the estate, which allowed her to inherit the life insurance money, the property, and claim Jimmy Don's widow pension from the city of Dallas. Betty Lou was finally getting what she felt was hers, or so she thought. Okay, friends, I need a drink because this woman is truly bunny boiler crazy. For those of you who haven't heard me say this before, I have two categories of crazy: batshit crazy and bunny boiler crazy. Now, if you have seen Fatal Attraction with Glenn Close, then you know where I get my bunny boiler crazy from. And yes, Betty Lou Beats is bunny boiler crazy. I needed another drink, sorry. Now, let's get on with the case and say hello to karma. The same month that Jimmy Don Beats was declared dead, which was March of 1985, Henderson County Sheriff's Deputy Rick Rose got a tip that an informant who had been charged in a drug possession case had information he wanted to trade in exchange for a lesser charge. Anyone want to bet what it is? The informant said he had information regarding the murder of Jimmy Don Beats. You can bet that Deputy Rose was interested and that the informant had his attention. See, as I mentioned earlier, Betty Lou hated to be alone, and in many of her marriages, she was unfaithful. Well, friends, a leopard doesn't change its spots, and neither does Betty Lou. Betty Lou had a one-night drunken sexcapade where, in her drunken stupor or drunken pillow talk, shared about killing her husband and burying him in the wishing well and how her son, Robbie, helped her. Betty Lou's boyfriend, Ray Bone, had attempted to stop the rumors, and they didn't hear of them, but apparently he was not successful, as another person called Crime Stoppers and told the same story Deputy Rose had heard from his informant. Loose lips sink ships? Just saying. While Deputy Rose was gathering additional evidence, Jimmy Don's son petitioned the court to set aside the determination of death since Betty Lou had lied about the lack of other heirs to Jimmy Don's estate. The court agreed and set aside the determination of death until a new trial could be held. This stopped Betty Lou from being able to access any of the money, property, or the widow's pension. Deputy Rose was able to secure a warrant for Betty Lou's trailer, but before the warrant was served, the trailer burned. Just like Jimmy Don's house, this was determined to be arson. However, this did not deter police, who knocked the wishing well over and dug out the blue sleeping bag which contained the body of Jimmy Don Beats. Lucky for police, Betty Lou's trailer did not completely burn to the ground, and they were able to retrieve several guns, one being a .38 caliber pistol, which ballistics matched to the bullets inside the sleeping bag with Jimmy Don's remains. Then the police proceeded to tear down a shed that Jimmy Don had built at Betty Lou's request. Under the slab that was her former patio, they found Dole Wayne Barker's remains, who at the time was still listed as missing. An arrest warrant was issued for Betty Lou Beats, and to the police's surprise, and frankly mine, a tip about Betty Lou's whereabouts came from her boyfriend, Ray Bone. Betty Lou was arrested on June 6, 1985, without incident. Betty Lou Beats was charged with murder for a remuneration for the murder against Jimmy Don Beats. She pled not guilty and claimed that 2 of her children committed the murders. 2 of Betty Lou's children, Shirley and Robbie, both testified against her in court in exchange for leniency in their cases. During Shirley's testimony, she was asked why she didn't call the police and report her mother after she murdered Dole Wayne Barker. Shirley stated that she was scared of her mother. Betty Lou, to the shock of many, took the stand to testify in her own defense, sticking to her story that Robbie killed Jimmy Don and that she helped him bury the body to protect him and to pay amends for sending him to live with his father all of those years ago and abandoning him. The prosecutor pointed out that Betty Lou not once showed any feelings and never shed any tears for her murdered husband. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Betty Lou was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection. Betty Lou filed all appeals allowed in Texas. All were eventually denied. Justice Marvin Teague said during one of those appeals, "Miss Beats is evidently a greedy and insensitive killer who has managed to capture the romantic imagination of Americans in such modern cinematic classics as Black Widow." Betty Lou even filed a request for clemency, asking former Texas Governor George H. Bush to grant her mercy. Bush declined the request, which is no surprise to me, but said, "I'm confident that the courts, both state and federal, have thoroughly reviewed all the issues raised by the defendant." Betty Lou Beats stayed on death row for 15 years and was one of only 4 women on death row in Texas at the time. Betty Lou was on death row alongside Pamela Perillo, Carla Faye Tucker, and Frances Elaine Newton, all who were on death row for murder. Betty Lou claimed she was innocent and that her children lied and that her attorney also lied. She held fast to this claim until the day she died. Betty Lou Beats was executed by lethal injection on February 24, 2000 at 6:18 p.m. in Huntsville, Texas. Betty Lou Beats was never tried for the murder of Dole Wayne Baker due to the fact she was sentenced to death. Okay, I need a nice long drink after this case. I don't like widows, black widows. Betty Lou, don't like you. Now, I have posted pictures from this case and all of my sources on our website at truecrimeandwinetime.com. There, you will find copies of Betty Lou's appeals and several other media stories about Betty Lou being a victim in this case. I will let you all decide after you read the stories. I personally am sticking to my belief that she was bunny boiler crazy, and that after shooting 3 husbands, 2 who died, trying to run over another, justice was served. If you would like to interact with me directly and get information about our upcoming episodes, you can find me on Twitter at Terry True Crime or on Facebook, True Crime and Wine Time. I look forward to chatting with you soon. This episode was researched by Terry Dussault, edited by handsome hubby Phil Dussault, music by Ada Gold. Thank you for listening to True Crime and Wine Time. Until next week, stay safe, watch out for crime, and enjoy your wine time.